The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. On today's show, I've got Chris Walsh. Chris is CEO and president of Marijuana Business Daily, also more commonly known as MJBiz. MJBiz is the leading cannabis business news publisher, covers primarily North America, but also has an international edition and also a special hemp edition as well. And is very famous for holding events, in particular MJBiz Con, which is in Las Vegas, and it's 35,000 people, I think. A big number. Chris, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Like everyone, just trying to adjust to the new reality and avoid getting cabin fever here in my basement.
You and I both. Yeah, I understand that. Cool. So, yeah, I'm really glad that you were able to make time to chat today. Maybe, useful to just start with a bit about your background and what you were doing pre-cannabis and why you kind of decided to start MJBiz and your story, basically.
Sure. I'm a journalist by trade, so I worked at metropolitan newspapers on the business desk. So I was a reporter for many years covering everything from airlines to high tech to the economy to sports business, primarily here out of Denver. And then I moved to South Korea, moved to Seoul for 2 years and was an editor there at an English language newspaper. And I moved back to the United States and was trying to figure out what I wanted to do and saw the writing on the wall for many years with mainstream kind of journalism and the weakness of the business model in the new world that was developing digitally. And so I was finishing up my MBA, and we, the two co-founders of the company, were looking for someone to basically launch a legit news service for the cannabis industry, which at this time was 2011. So I think if we can all take ourselves back almost 10 years to how marijuana and cannabis in general were viewed by the general public, it was a risky move from a professional standpoint, but we saw a need for real analysis and kind of journalism for the emerging marijuana industry at that time, and also market research and kind of real like business to business insight on how to run your dispensaries better and really serving that kind of niche like every other industry has. And so we started the company in May of 2011. And in the US at that time, it was very, there was a huge stigma. A lot of it's still federally illegal, and of course was back then, but states had legalized medical cannabis and then had on their own. And there was enough rough guidance from the federal government that businesses just started taking risks, or people started taking risks and opening up grows, opening up dispensaries. So it was a really turbulent time. But we saw this need for this, and then we evolved over time to launch events, professional business events for the industry. And from day one, we really wanted to help professionalize the industry. Again, with my background being in mainstream journalism as a business reporter, and the two co-founders coming from banking and marketing, we were kind of outsiders in the cannabis industry. I like beer, and I like mixed drinks. I was not really a cannabis person, especially after college. So I didn't have the natural affinity that a lot of people had for cannabis in the industry at that time. So we were kind of seen as somewhat outsiders, but we're trying to embrace the industry and help it grow and bring professionalism to it. And I think we've been able to do that along the way. But I think we all saw the opportunity to use our skill set in this emerging industry and took some big risks in the early days, and they paid off.
That's great to hear the sort of transition. Do you think that kind of objectivity by kind of not being a marijuana person, it kind of helped?
I think it did to some degree. Now it's much more common. And now that it's legal from a recreational standpoint in our home base of Colorado and many states across the country, some of us have relaxed our views on it. Like, I didn't want to be doing anything illegal back then. Now that it's legal, I'll partake in it from time to time. But back then, it was kind of a double-edged sword. I remember I went to an industry meeting in Denver when we first started, and it was some CEOs of some of the early companies that would get together monthly, kind of a executive type group. And they let me come in as a journalist to their meeting. And at one point, I went to the bathroom and I was at the urinal, and a guy came in and was next to me. And always that awkward conversation for males when someone starts talking to you in that situation. And he said, you know what, you seem pretty cool, but you're not an FBI agent, are you? So, again, at that time, there was a lot of sensitivities around this because these people were pioneers in the industry and taking big personal and professional risks. And kind of the development in the US of this industry relies on them for taking those risks and bringing it more into the mainstream and building the momentum. But at that time, I didn't want to really talk about my personal cannabis use because I didn't use it. And that was seen, again, as you were an outsider or you didn't understand the industry. But at the same time, because I brought that outside perspective and we brought kind of the skill set from mainstream businesses in, it was a good time to start blending the two. So, again, in some cases, it was kind of like, who are you, even a year or two later. But in other cases, people really appreciated how we approached it. I mean, there was no professional journalism covering this industry. You'd have a mainstream newspaper or TV station write about something or air a segment, and it was filled with pot puns and almost like, look at this silly little thing that's going on. But we never approached it that way. So, I have an MBA. I always approach things from a business perspective, and people in the industry weren't getting information and content for them from a professional standpoint, a business standpoint. So that part really helped us. And then when we held our first trade show and event, it was more of a conference back then with a very small trade show floor. The industry really hadn't seen anything like that because all the gatherings at that time were quote unquote medical marijuana festivals or conferences, but you'd have, Cypress Hill as the guest entertainer. All the exhibitor booths would be, companies selling bongs and rolling papers, and they'd have, women in bikinis, and it wasn't medical and it wasn't business. And that's what we tried to bring to the industry. And I remember when we first held it, I was wearing a full suit, right? And other people did bring suit jackets, some in full suits, but a lot more casual. But I think while there was outside, like kind of, I hope this isn't getting corporate perception, it was really embraced at the time because it did bring professionalism to the industry. And I think people felt they were getting together and that this was serious and it wasn't about bongs and rolling papers and scantily clad women and rap groups. So, we really were able to build off that. And we brought quality journalism. Everyone we employ, including myself, on the journalism side are journalists, and they have that background, they have that training. And so they approach things as objectively as possible. And we're not influenced by companies that give us advertising dollars or sponsor our events. And that's a really unique thing that we've been able to maintain over the years that isn't really common across the cannabis trade media. So yeah, I do think, we brought a lot of benefit in those early days, although there was definitely some skepticism.
That sounds like quite a journey. I mean, would you mind elaborating a little bit more about, I think I saw you say that in another interview that you guys started out exclusively like advising dispensaries and you sort of evolved your model as you went along. What were the sort of pivots and blind alleys you went down?
Yeah, so the original idea was to provide kind of business intelligence to dispensary owners. So the medical cannabis dispensaries that existed at the time, and really trying to help them through case studies, through interviews, through analysis, run their businesses better and deal with challenges. But it's what we quickly found out. So our name when we first launched was actually Dispensary Insider. So every industry has kind of a B2B, a business to business publication and or content service. And that's what we were trying to be for this industry. And so we were targeting that one element of it, which was people running the stores, the dispensaries. And so, it started off more bloggy, where it was me kind of figuring out the industry and kind of writing some of my perceptions or analysis and highlighting, things that I saw and people I talked to. And we quickly, well, not quickly, I guess, 7-8 months in, realized there wasn't a good way to monetize that business owners at that time weren't as interested in that. They didn't come from that kind of a background in many cases. A lot of the people that started the industry here were, as I mentioned, really into cannabis. They might have been growing it in their basements. They weren't like seasoned business executives or owners or entrepreneurs, which isn't a knock against them. It was just the reality of the situation at that time. You didn't have many people like that getting into this industry with a huge stigma that was federally illegal. So that was the nature of the beast at that time. And, people wouldn't pay for content. There wasn't a lot of advertisers that were not going towards the consumer side. So there was a lot that were trying to aim at the medical cannabis patient or the marijuana user, but not a lot of that business to business, people looking for vendors and that type of dynamic. So we realized after a while that we had to monetize this or it wasn't going to work. And one of the things that happened is we actually almost got out of the whole industry because 7 or 8 months in, there was a big crackdown in the US and specifically California on the operating medical cannabis businesses by the federal government and district attorneys. So they started shutting down stores or dispensaries and some of the cannabis cultivation facilities. And so you saw this big contraction. And at that time, it was like, is this industry even going to make it? Yes, states have legalized, but they're opening businesses when you can't do that. It's federally illegal, despite legalization at the state level. So, there was really big concerns over the future. There was raids and, not really people being thrown in jail per se, but shutting down businesses, seizing their marijuana. And at that time is what we decided to do was put me off in another direction. So we had some other publications in other industries, similar B2B trade publications. And so I spent half my time researching what are some other areas we can go into. And then I kept one foot in the marijuana industry and kind of scaled things down and kept a presence with what we were doing on the website. And, I explored, a B2B publication for veterinarians, for instance, and for doctors. And we were really looking at any other industry. And so we came very close to getting out of it. And then really quickly to kind of fast forward, what happened is within a couple months after that, there was a key memo from someone in the Department of Justice at the federal level, and it kind of paved the way a little bit more for these businesses to operate. Basically, the government wasn't going to take a really aggressive approach to the industry, was this in a nutshell. So it kind of opened the door for more business, for more people to start businesses. The crackdowns kind of eased a bit. And then we decided to go back in with both feet. And so, it was, a lot of this is about timing, right? A lot about running any business is about timing and making a key critical decision in 2 or 3 moments over many, many years. And that was one of the key moments where we said, okay, we're going to go back into this and we're going to do what we can for this industry to help build it and for the people in it. And so, then we decided to do market research and a conference and trade show. And that kind of set us down the course because those efforts were pretty successful and we were first movers, and we did it with integrity. We did it with a focus on the industry and the people in it. And we did it with, quality journalism. So the bedrock of what we do, I think really helped fuel our brand and our reach in the industry and gave us credibility. So people trusted us because we weren't just doing it. We weren't doing things because someone was paying us money. So we weren't writing about a company or spotlighting them on stage because they're a sponsor. And, we were vetting all the information and everything. And I think that helped fuel us kind of down this path.
Yeah, it's great. I think trust is a great word as well, particularly doing what you're doing, because it's essential really for people to keep tuning in or reading, etc. So what's your main revenue model now then?
So it's interesting, the world has been turned upside down, as we all know, in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. And so we entered the year really optimistic about the industry globally, in Europe, in the UK, in South America, in the US and Canada, even in China. Lots of movement So our business plan, a lot of our revenues come from the in-person events that we do. So as you mentioned earlier, MJBizCon, that conference I mentioned we did in 2012, our first one, had 400 attendees and about a dozen booths in Denver. And that was a smashing success for us at that time. Our event in December of last year that we had in Las Vegas had almost 35,000 attendees and 1,200 exhibitors. So that's really a reflection of how the industry has grown. And a lot of our revenue comes from that. It comes from other events that we do in person. We had one planned for Denmark, which would have been our second year, for a European symposium. We had one in Colombia that would have been our second year too, which is a Latin America symposium. We've done events in Canada and in other states in the US. So our model has been heavily reliant on the live events, with the publishing and kind of journalism side as a smaller slice. But that event model has allowed us to fund the really quality journalism. The editorial department's the biggest part of our company. And that's our reach into the industry. That's our credibility. That's how we serve the industry every day. And then the events bring everyone together. And so, with a bulk of our revenue being tied to the in-person events, like every other company in this environment, we're having to rethink, reframe, refocus, reorient, and figure out, what the near-term future is when we can't hold these in-person events, what the midterm future is when we don't know when we can hold them, and then what the long-term future is of what is behavior of our audience, what is the wants and needs, what are they going to want in the long run, and how is this going to fundamentally change things in that aspect, and be preparing for that. So that's kind of where our head is at now. And it's hard because there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I think that's, it's completely indefinite nature of this. And when we're going to be able to interact with each other, certainly on a large scale, which is fundamental to your in-person events. So, I'm sure there's a lot of time for reflection and trying to figure out what that game plan is.
Yeah. And so, we're renewing our focus on the audience and making sure that we have as good an understanding as possible into what business owners, what entrepreneurs, what investors need right now and going forward. And is it connections? Is it sales leads? Is it networking? Is it information? Is it market research? So we're doubling down on our efforts to really understand what this industry wants and needs, and then what we can provide. So, part of that is we've made the shift to virtual events for the foreseeable future. And those have not, been very popular in a normal world. People highly value face-to-face contact. And I think they still do, as we all get on these Zoom meetings every day and try and, operate remotely. You realize even more the importance of being able to be in a room with someone. And so that's not going to go away, but it's going to take a while before we can get there, and before most people are comfortable, whether it's getting on an airplane to go to something, whether it's being in a big room with a lot of people. So part of our strategy now is to really move as much digitally to the digital world as possible, including with our events.
Yeah, that makes sense. Events, I think most feedback I get from going to events is people like meeting other people. So you're right, it's quite a key part. But maybe some new things will spring up out of this, necessity being the mother of all invention, etc.
Yeah, and that's where our heads are at. And, it's really, for us, it's not about here's an event that we're hosting or here's a story that we're writing. It's really, how do we connect this industry together and get the people what they want and what they need. And so, you can still network, you can still build communities. If you're a grower and you need to connect with other growers for kind of peer-to-peer discussions, there's a lot of ways you can get at all of this without being in person. And that's what we're exploring now aggressively and launching things around that.
Fantastic. Cool. So if we can maybe talk about some more broader themes within sort of media, I guess. It's obviously a loaded question, but how important do you think high quality media is for the industry? And, that's both from the perspective of people in it, entrepreneurs, but also people working in the industry and also people outside the industry.
Yeah, I think on the media side, we've seen a lot of progress in the last 2 years. I'd pin it back to about 2 years ago. Do a lot of media interviews because, we have a lot of institutional knowledge built up over 9 years of this industry. So we're able to analyze trends and help some of the other media that is covering this industry. And I can tell it went from getting a call from, say, the Wall Street Journal in the US, and kind of, the reporter really not understanding the industry at all and still kind of asking some soft questions. And then you read the pieces and it's kind of, again, the puns, there's puns in the headline, Rocky Mountain High in Colorado, or using the word green throughout for cash/marijuana. And you've seen that dissipate. There are more media that are either focused on this industry or they've dedicated someone or multiple people to really understand the industry and cover it. So you have seen a lot of progress, and it's taken seriously now, and people realize there's an economic benefit, there's community benefits, there's problems too, right? It's a new experiment across the world. And so media plays a big role in kind of shining the spotlight on it and covering the good and the bad. And that includes areas where it needs to improve, problems that arise that people didn't expect. And so we are seeing more of that in the mainstream media. And then there's, cannabis trade publications, there's podcasts such as yours, there's really quality media developing around this and people taking it seriously. And I think that's the big change, is that people are taking it seriously now and they're approaching it like any other industry. And so on the outside of the media and the industry, the big change has been a big move towards people with business savvy, people who have made careers or developed and sold companies that are getting in. So you have executives from huge companies, such as Coors, the big beer maker here in, out here in North America. You have executives from European companies getting involved, and they're sitting on the boards of companies. They're actually taking executive positions at these companies. There's former politicians that were once vehemently against cannabis and are on record as saying that, even 5 years ago, that are now tied to the industry too. So a lot of that's the dollars of the industry. Of course, there is opportunity here, but a lot of it's a new understanding from people that A, the stigma's gone away, that B, everything we all kind of grew up hearing about marijuana, a lot of it was overblown or downright false in terms of the damage that it does to society or to people. And that's been a real positive trend in many respects, although there is some blowback for sure, especially for people who have been in this industry for a while, that's becoming very corporate. It's becoming suit and tie. It's becoming an industry that is attracting people who are all about the dollars and not about the plant and not about the patients and not about the users. And there is truth to that. But there are others. There are plenty who are coming in that are embracing the plant and the patients and the consumers and not trying to treat this like developing a computer chip or a brand of cookies or whatever. That's kind of just another product. So the industry is still at an inflection point where you have kind of the old guard who built this, who had a deep affinity for the plant, and then the new people coming in who are savvy business people, savvy investors, and they're bringing their experience, but they're bringing both positive and negative things. In Europe, you have it's developed completely differently, obviously in many respects, and it's a more medical focus. It's been more professional since the start. And it's treated more as a medical offering and not a product like it has been specifically in the US. So you find that across the world too. Many of the countries that have legalized have done it, and they're doing it from a medical perspective. So different regulations and a lot of people with medical backgrounds getting in, not business backgrounds or not cannabis backgrounds. So even outside the US, the change has just been the big push towards legalization, but it's starting from a different standpoint. So you haven't seen that dynamic of the real cannabis focused people getting in the early days in other countries, and then it moving to more business people. It's still very medical focused across the world, except here.
Yeah, definitely a different evolution in North America. I think it feels to me more culturally ingrained in North America than it is in Europe. And, there's probably a similar incidence, or maybe not much in it in terms of people who take cannabis recreationally, but it's really not talked about over here. Whereas I remember growing up with US movies, and there's loads of casual references to reefer, and even in things like Back to the Future, which is like a kid's film, I had no idea what it meant at the time. But obviously you realize when you're older, that sort of thing would never happen in sort of European popular media. And I think that is a slight difference. But yeah, very interesting. Loads of stuff there. I quite like what you talk about. I see there needed to be that blend of people coming from established industries, where there's well-trodden path of how to do things, and adapting that skill set into this new one rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think maybe there was a few people, like we're further behind than you guys, but there's quite a few people trying to do that here. And now hopefully I think you guys actually just recently released an article about this very same thing, about coaxing people over from established industries into cannabis.
Yeah. And, we've seen it at MJBiz Daily ourselves. Some of the people we brought in, especially at the leadership level over the past year and a half, wouldn't have even considered a job in the industry or with us, 2-3 years ago. So we have experienced that ourselves. I think one of the big challenges across the industry and across the world for the cannabis sector is the mainstream people coming into it to take jobs in the field often don't realize how different it is than what they were doing. And it is so different. It's a different evolution. It's a different type of quote unquote product or medicine. It has different issues than we've ever really seen anywhere. So, and it has a different audience and customer base that does business differently themselves. And so we've seen this at our own company, and I've seen this all across the industry. Is one of the challenges when you bring someone in, especially more of a seasoned person for your leadership team, is they don't really realize the differences and are trying to approach everything like they did before in their other industry. Entrepreneurs do this all the time in this industry. They come and say, I built successful companies. I know how to do this, right? And they don't know what they don't know, and they don't acknowledge what they don't know. And so I've seen many, many people fall on their face because the industry just operates so differently. And you kind of have to use your skill set and your overall kind of business and professional experience, and then start with a blank slate from there. And you have to understand how this industry works first. And you can't come in and make a bunch of assumptions based on your previous experience. And that's really hard because if you're successful, you've done things that made you successful, and you want to keep doing those things. And you think that that they'll work because they have in the past. They don't many times work in this industry. And so even with our own team, but again, across the industry, when I speak at events, I always say this, especially for new people trying to get in, is you really have to take a step back, understand the dynamics of this industry, understand how it works, understand the people in it and how they work, and then apply your skill set to that. You can't force the industry to operate the way you want to, and it does operate a lot differently. So that is one of the challenges as companies look in to bring in these people from outside.
Yeah. And it's probably a lesson for wider life in general and other industries as well. But that flexibility and adaptability, an appreciation of your experience and the things that you've learned and things that you've done successfully, but an appreciation of the nuances of cannabis, very heavy regulation, which is patchwork and not even, and then stigma and all those other things, that significant challenges.
Yeah, I think one of the other big ones I would like to highlight is you have the fast moving nature of the industry, which a lot of people aren't used to. And I've seen this over and over again is in a normal mature industry, you kind of know how things are moving, right? And you might be growing a couple percentage points a year as a company, your product line, even if you're growing 15, 20%, you're still in a relatively steady state for how the industry operates. The difference here is that things change so quickly. You have to be flexible. You have to be nimble. You have to respond. You have to relearn things. And so, we've had a saying for many years, and we don't use cannabis slang or jargon in anything we do outward facing, but internally we call it pot years, because 3 to 4 months in the cannabis industry is like a year in any other industry. And now with what's going on now, every week is like a year. And it is for most people in this environment, but in cannabis, it's exacerbated. So it's very hard for people to understand how quickly you have to move. Sometimes you have to do it thoughtfully and strategically, but everything changes quickly. You cannot do, until the last 6 to 8 months, we could not really plan more than a year out. And even a year was hard because you make plans and 4 months later, everything's different because there's different regulations. There's a million things that have changed in the industry and the market, not only in the US, but globally. So now again, you can't even plan to the end of the year because of the current situation. But in cannabis, everything is accelerated, and it can be hard to embrace and adapt to.
Yeah, you got to buckle up. Cool. Well, thank you for that. I guess one of the things I'm always quite interested in is, arguably all kind of media is sort of inherently biased in some way. There's editorial decisions that are kind of critical to it, what gets shown and what doesn't. And perhaps you guys are maybe a little less kind of prone to that because it's business focused and less political, but I expect you've still got some challenges there. How do you go about mitigating that?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, my whole career before this had been in journalism, so it's something that I have been aware of and trained in and experiencing since I majored in journalism in college and then entered the field. Same with all of our editorial team. I mean, to your point, you can be as objective as possible, but it's not. You can never be 100% because who you talk to for a story, what quotes you use, how you organize it, and what you put first, and how you structure your sentences. All that is based on an individual or a group or an editor's thoughts, and so at the end of the day, there's no such thing as 100%, right? Because you're choosing people who to talk to, you're choosing what to put in, and so that's just a battle that can never be won. But you can approach it with integrity and as much objectivity as possible and not be influenced by your personal opinion, by, again, people giving the company money, by people putting pressure on you to write it a certain way. And so we try and instill these values across the company. We don't. So to give you an idea is when we have the conference element, the education element of our shows, a lot of event companies, not only in cannabis, but outside of it in many industries, again, if you're a top sponsor, you may get an address in front of the whole crowd. If you have a big booth or you spend a lot of money, you may get included in that stage time on the main stages that's blended in with normal content and isn't its own segmented kind of, here's sponsored things over here, but this is our real content. A lot of them blur the lines. And so, we approach the content that we create for the audience, whether it's a story, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a live event, with the same integrity that we bring across the company and in the journalism side. So when we line up speakers, it's many factors. It's diversity, getting different opinions in, getting different people from different stages in their businesses, from different geographical regions, and it's all based on a lot of factors that we think will provide as much value to the audience as possible. We guide the conversation about what the topic is. We take PowerPoints, and I can't tell you how many times we have edited PowerPoints, and gotten a lot of pushback because a speaker will say, well, I usually just show up at the thing and give them a thumb drive and talk about what I'm going to talk about. And that could be promotional. It could be plugging their own company. It could be plugging their clients. We don't allow any of that. Sure, it creeps in. We try not to allow it as much as possible, but we vet these PowerPoints. We go back and forth with them on what we think should be included. And so that's a kind of a long-winded way of saying across the company, we try and do this. And everyone from the sales to marketing teams knows that this is the backbone of what we do. So, those even internally, those departments are not coming up and saying, hey, we should write about this company, or you should get them on stage. They know that's a big no-no. And so that's how we approach it. And it all starts on the journalism side with hiring people and setting the tone and the culture over what we expect. And that's, again, integrity, objectivity as much as humanly possible. But, when you're also providing analysis, we're using our institutional knowledge to provide some analysis too. So it's not about targeting certain people or calling them out as much as it is giving an overview of situations of news developments and then giving context to it, an analysis of how that fits in the bigger picture.
Yeah, very interesting as well. I mean, that integrity piece, as you say, is every part of your company, not just the people that are producing the content, but every other part of the organization, which is great. Cool. So, I mean, MJBiz is a B2B content provider, as you said. What are the other areas of the cannabis media that you personally are interested in that you like?
This is it. I mean, I think the B2B side, with an MBA and now, and running this business, and it's really, I embrace the business side the most. I think there are some professionally run companies that target the consumer, not the higher end consumer, meaning that they spend a lot, but the sophisticated consumer that embraces the product, embraces the lifestyle, but in a really responsible way. And I think there's some good media out there that helps me get an idea of the end user, which we don't serve directly on purpose. We're really about that business side. But I've been impressed with some of the attempts to on the media side to serve that customer base. It evolved from the high times of 20, 30 years ago, and which was really aimed at the quote unquote stoner. And now you have, and there's nothing wrong with the stoner crowd, if you want to call it that, but a lot of the media has evolved again into the professional user. So it's not necessarily the college student, or the 50-year-old hippie that's smoking weed. It's the professional people that have ingrained this in their lifestyle, and it's like a beer connoisseur type approach and audience, and that helps mainstream the industry too. So I do enjoy some of that, the evolution in that side of it.
Yeah, there's quite a broad range in there. I think, obviously the kind of stoner side of things is pretty well established and has been going for quite a while. There's some really good medical ones. I really like Project CBD. I don't know if you've come across those guys, but they put out some great medical content, I think. Yeah,
and that would be the other area is the medical side is fascinating. And we made an acquisition, of course, right before all this happened, but we bought the Emerald Conference, which is in the US, has been around for several years, and it's a cannabis science conference. And so we made a targeted move to join and help propel the science side of the industry beyond what we do now. And I think there's a lot of interesting things developing in that area. There's a lot of research and studies that are going to be done, in the coming years as this normalizes, as it takes more of a scientific and healthcare approach across the world. And there's some interesting media around that. There's a huge desire from the scientists and healthcare professionals that have already started touching the industry. There's a huge desire for more for them in general, whether it's meetings and connections or white papers, sharing research, all of that. But then we expect that side to grow too as more people come into the fold, more doctors, more scientists, more university researchers. And I think there's a lot of room there.
Yeah, for sure. It's like the one thing I keep seeing, and it's obviously helping with what I'm doing, but there's certainly a thirst for more information and knowledge, which is great. Cool. So as we come towards the end, it would be kind of remiss to not talk about Corona a bit. What are the things that you're seeing in terms of how it's affecting cannabis? How do you think it might affect things going forward? Impossible question to answer, I know, but
yeah, that's the big question right now. I think there could be some positive outcomes, and I don't know what degree and when they would happen. But here in the United States, I've been thinking for a while that this could potentially help the industry in the sense that as we come out of this, the economy's, going to be in tatters, right? And so there's going to be a big focus here in the US and globally on generating economic activity and bolstering economies. And, for the US on the recreational side and even medical, there's strong arguments to be made that, if you relax some of the rules, if the federal government opens the door to legalization across the country, the economic impact would be huge. And so that's one way to jumpstart an economy. We've seen it in state after state that has legalized medical or recreational here. We saw it in Canada. The industry isn't as big or as much of an economic contributor to countries outside of North America yet. Again, very medical focused, run by health departments, not as much of a focus on the economy and the business aspect. But as we go down the road, we have great evidence of the potential for this industry to create jobs, to create business opportunities, to bolster communities. And so all of that combined could convince more lawmakers to get on board this, to revive economies. You're talking billions and billions of dollars, here in the US, billions in Canada, and the international market outside of that is a lot smaller, but the opportunity is massive, and you can look to North America to see that opportunity. And so there's a chance that we will come out of this with a renewed focus and more acceptance from the people that can really propel this movement forward in this industry. But, the other argument is that maybe it will be so far down the chain of priorities that people won't really realize it. I can see that too. So again, we can't predict the future, but I think if the industry can lobby effectively together and show, hey, we got to get our economies going, and what better way to do it with cannabis? And here, look what it did over here. We can make some progress. I think in terms of the business side and investing side, there's going to be some pain. There's going to be some people that don't make it. And it might take the industry a bit longer to get back to where it was before, because at the end of the day, it's all going to be on how much money do patients and consumers have to spend on this. And with people losing their jobs, with economies shut down, with whole countries shut down, that's going to have enormous impacts. Even if we get moving here, the rollout's going to be slow back to kind of opening up our economies. And I think the pain is going to be felt for a while. And so that's going to mean less dollars going in at the very end of the supply chain, and will ripple through the industry. So I think you're going to see innovation as we're trying to do now. You're going to see it across the industry, and that's going to bring some big benefits down the road, but you're going to see some pain too. And it is going to be, in some cases, survival of the fittest. But I am absolutely convinced the midterm to long-term health of this industry and future is very bright, because that momentum, I don't see how this would hurt the perception of cannabis. I don't see how it would turn back the clock in any way or convince people that this isn't the way to go for the world in terms of legalization, at least on the medical side. So I'm really optimistic about the future. When that future gets here, how long it takes, how much pain there is, I have no idea. But right now, if you're in the industry, you really have to buckle down, focus on your cash flow, try to make it through this with an eye on what's next. Change your company in the ways that we can foresee how things are going to change. Don't do business the way you were doing it 2 months ago and expect that it's all going to come back to that way. There are going to be fundamental changes we're all going to have to get used to for the foreseeable future. And if you're clinging to your business model, to your way of doing business from January or last year, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think the companies and parts of the industry that recognize that and embrace that and accept it. It's all about accepting it. It's easy to just go forward and say, we're going to get back. And it's easy for us to say, we'll be back in Vegas in December with a giant event. If we plan for that and it doesn't happen, we're in bad shape. So I think if companies are taking these approaches, they're going to make it through and then ultimately thrive, because they'll be positioned to come out of this strong and maybe and hopefully stronger than they went into it.
Yeah, so that focus on adaptability again. Yeah, I think, mental health issues and general health issues are going to be a big thing that come out of this. So you would hope that cannabis can play a role in helping with those. But equally, I have high hopes for hemp as a sustainable material as well, which we've not really covered here, but that could hopefully see a change and hopefully an increase in profile off the back of it. Cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me for this. My trademark last question is, what did your parents say when you told them you were starting a cannabis media company?
Yeah, that's a great question. My parents were immensely supportive. My dad is a journalist. He's been a White House reporter for several decades. He's written books on the presidency. So he came from a very professional, the highest levels of journalism. And, I remember telling him and saying, wow, he's going to be like, oh, what is my son doing? I had a great journalism career and was kind of following his footsteps. And now I'm, with this marijuana publication. He was very supportive, and he always has been in whatever I choose to do, and has been proud I'm a journalist. And it all came to a head 2 years ago. We had our big conference in Las Vegas, and he actually spoke at it, talking about how U.S. presidents have approached marijuana and legalization over the last 20 years. And it made a lot of sense for the audience. I didn't recommend him. Actually, it was other people on our staff that said, hey, this would be a good angle. With his insight, I mean, he's covered every president since Reagan and has great perspective on this. So there was one shot that one of my colleagues got, and I was being interviewed by media. Right in the background was my dad being interviewed by another media at the conference that we created in marijuana. So it all came together, and it was awesome. My mom embraced it from the start too, and neither of them did anything with cannabis, if ever, but they were supportive. And I will tell you, my aunt is a Catholic nun.
Right.
And she lives in a convent, and she was, even when we started, especially, it was the medical side, it was medical cannabis. But she was very supportive too. So I had a lot of family support. In fact, I don't have anyone in the family who questioned it, who made it awkward. So I'm blessed, but I will find that I will tell you that out of most people that we've hired, that I've asked the same question: what did your former colleagues say when you told them I'm leaving the company for this? What did your family say? I'd say in many cases there was curiosity, if not outright support. A couple people have said, they got some, an uncle or someone was, really upset or questioning. But I think things have changed so quickly that people, they're fascinated more than anything by it, even if they don't fully support it or do it themselves.
Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad there was a warm reception to it, and that must have been a great moment with your dad up on stage and stuff.
What about you?
What about me? Yeah, good question. Yeah, I think initially I'm a lawyer by trade, so my parents were similarly like, what are you doing? And it took a bit of time to understand, but I kind of spelled out the opportunity and how this could actually help people, and they kind of got it. We don't really talk about it a huge amount, so maybe they're holding some stuff back, but yeah, they didn't instantly kick me out of the house, if you like.
They didn't disown you. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Chris, thank you. This has been great. There's loads more we could talk about, but it'll be great to maybe do this again further down the track when we're all hopefully back to some level of normality, and see where you guys land out in your reinvention or adaptation, let's call it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd be happy to come back whenever you want. I really appreciate you having me on. It was fun. I had a good time, and It's nice to be able to connect still.
Yeah, cool. Great. Well, have a lovely day, Chris.
Okay.
Take care.
You too. Thanks.